Now, chapter 2. We go with chapter 2. The belief of the Mama and disciples. Funny title, but we have to get out Beely. Ready to toss Beely. Give Beely a fly, and we'll teach him how to fly, or we'll teach you how he learned how to fly soon. Well, we're going to wait till the end for that. All right. Now, the belief of the Mama and the disciples. So to begin with, on this, I would recommend reading this book by Eric Spencer, who really did this question in depth about the Mama, about who is my mother. Really good book on that, and he drew on a lot of Carson for this as well. For this, but he probably did the most extensive job on this topic in chapter 2. If you're interested in reading that, it's good. Also, to begin with, we see that the Mama had some foundational belief in her son. Here, she had some inescapable belief that she had acquired at his very beginnings. And now she had a sketchy belief that Jesus could resolve an embarrassing situation of wine running out at an out-of-town wedding. A belief in Jesus based on his much earlier self-identification as being the Son of God. We read about that in Luke a couple years ago. A belief that Jesus reiterates in this second chapter of John in verse 16. Enough belief for his mother to commission Jesus to turn some water into wine for the poorly planned wedding. Yet Jesus rebukes, or Carson says reproaches his mother, for such a lame request. Questioning the very necessity of such a request, and even questioning their relationship to each other by addressing his mother with the generic word woman. Jesus never calls her mother for some reason. It is a parental address that is apparently unheard of either in Greek or Hebrew literature, according to Hartdegen. And even the Samaritan woman of chapter 4, which we'll get to, is semi-respectfully called Madam, according to Barrett. Oh, Barrett. Yeah, I mentioned Barrett last week, didn't I? So this is another commentary that we are studying. Oh, good old Barrett. 1951. So we're going to go through a lot of grievances with Barrett as well throughout our studies that Carson has as well. And that's going to be illuminating as well. So there is a very serious questioning of their dependent relationship at this point, even though Jesus appeared to have been his mother's primary caregiver. Since Joseph is no longer mentioned and Mary is eventually passed on to our respectful author, John, by Jesus. Hence, a very serious questioning of Mary's present outing of him from the maternal nest. Outing from the maternal nest. What do I mean by that? Well, give you an illustration then. Okay, there's a nest that I picked up from one of our trees this morning, a soggy nest. So here's Mary outing him. Baby Jesus. Okay? But it wasn't exactly like that, because Jesus was 30 years old. Okay. And in such a way, Mary was indeed outing Jesus, asking him to put his money where his mouth was. Not terribly unlike that outing by Judas Iscariot, or not unlike that outing by Satan that Jesus had just encountered in the desert. An outing forcing Jesus to play his alleged godly hand. Yep, to be the Messiah that he claimed to be. After all, Jesus claimed to be the Son of God at the tender age of 12, not 12 weeks. Yet, when he called, you may remember, he called the temple his Father's house. And that's something he is about to do once again, but this time turfing the thieves that are doing business in his Father's house, kicking them out of his Father's holy nest. However, it appears that Jesus took some offense at that outing by his mother. Yep, took some offense by that, with an acting out of his own. Yet, still, he was not dishonoring his mother by refusing her simple request. You're not supposed to refuse your mother, even when you're 30, it seems. However, he called his mother on that. He called her woman to discourage any further outings by her. Outings that would accelerate his eventual demise. Outings that would accelerate him to his hour of power. An hour that John will allude to frequently. Now, naturally, Calvin says this reproach is a strong prophetic attempt of Jesus to dissuade people from giving undue worship, or the Latin word latria, to Mary in the future. Since only God deserves our worship. But that attempt doesn't appear to have been all that effective for Roman Catholics. Nope. Calvin says, in their fury and madness, they continue to strip Christ of his spoils, leaving him almost naked. A horrid blasphemy, Calvin says. Yeah, he's probably right. Yet while that prophetic attempt by Jesus may not have been all that effective, Calvin does console us with the fact that Jesus does not pull off this miracle recklessly, that he does this miracle in his own sweet time. And his mother recognized that prerogative of a fully mature son by commanding others to act as his assistants. Yep, it seems that the mama had some pull in nearby Cana as well. Or Cana, rather. So, the mama and the disciples witnessed a divine miracle of divino. Ha ha ha. The Latin there. Which accelerated their nominal belief, apparently. So, for this very first miracle, Jesus follows a pattern of request, rebuff, and then compliance. A pattern that we see in the very next miracle at Cana as well, according to Svensson, which we'll see in John 4. And this Cana was a town about 9 miles north of Nazareth. It was the rival town that Nate came from. We'll read about that in chapter 21. It was a town rivaling them in goods and services, no doubt, and perhaps even rivaling them in sports. So this miracle that was just demonstrated was a very quick rebuff of Nate the Great's "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" with the obvious answer being, "It cannot. Go, Cana, go." Which is to say, we tend to see some pattern of request from Cana, and then something like a rebuff from Jesus, a rebuff to expand the immediate conversation, We then see a verbal response or commitment indicating some fledgling belief. We got through fledgling last time. By the plaintiff with that nominal commitment of a fledgling belief then being honored with a miracle. And that's a pretty reasonable pattern, if you like patterns. Moving on. Let's take a look at Jesus going ballistic in the temple. At the temple. His Wreck-It Ralph episode. Yes, his acting somewhat recklessly, as those marketeers tended to think. This begs the question, well, why is Jesus only going ballistic now? When he could, well, have gone ballistic numerous other times when he went to the temple in Jerusalem. Well, because his ministry was now fully underway. He had just been baptized and had just completed an intensive pilgrimage in the desert. He had just overcome the very greatest temptations of the devil. And it was now his hour to actively preach. It was now his hour to actively teach. However, adoptionists, which we mentioned last week, would say that only now did Jesus have the full authority to administer that ministry. And only now did he have the full authority to express his great offense that his Father's house was now being turned into a marketplace. That it was being turned into a place of profit rather than of a proper place of profits. On the contrary, as discussed earlier, Jesus always had that full authority. It just wasn't prudent to use that authority previously. Nope. After all, who's going to listen to a 12-year-old anyway? Or listen to someone from Nazareth, for that matter. Certainly not the marketeers in the temple in almighty Jerusalem. But he certainly had the ears of Cana now, didn't he? Then, of course, Jesus uses the boastful allegory of himself being the temple, of his totally destroying that enormous and still uncompleted temple of Herod's in Jerusalem, and of his raising some superior temple in a mere 3 days. And the reality is just so obvious we're not going to get into it. But, of course, Barrett, our irritating Barrett here, claims that John was confused as to when the temple was actually completed. But Carson suggests, no, John knew exactly when it was completed. Yeah. Because John was a regular to Jerusalem selling fish. And Barrett insist that this account of John's was begged, borrowed, and stolen from Mark and others anyhow. And he goes on about this theory about a Q document that has been disproven recently. So Barrett claims that completed temple concept of John's was simply an honest mistake by some mysterious other John and others. However, Carson rightfully takes issue with Barrett's translation here, with the grammar expert Carson even citing Stanley Porter's grammar here. Stanley Porter. Saying that Barrett was overzealous in his translation. Stanley Porter, huh? Stanley Porter is amazing. If anybody wants to study Greek, go to McMaster in Hamilton. You will be astounded by one of the finest in the world. If he's not the top, he's in the top 3. So you've got even Carson deferring to Porter. And we'll probably be mentioning him again. Now, finally, we're going to close with some discussion on the nominal belief of his followers at that point. Yep, Demama and the disciples. Discussion on a nominal belief that Calvin describes excellently. Here he says, Calvin goes, "When the evangelist says, therefore, that those men believed, I do not understand that they counterfeited a faith which did not exist, but that they were in some way constrained," oh, we heard that word constrained a little bit this morning, "to enroll themselves as the followers of Christ. And yet, it appears that their faith was not true and genuine, because Christ excludes them from the number of those on whose sentiments reliance might be placed. Besides, that faith depended solely on miracles and had no root in the gospel, and therefore could not be steady or permanent. Miracles do indeed assist the children of God in arriving at the truth, but it does not amount to actual believing. When they admire the power of God so as to merely believe that it is true, but not to subject themselves wholly to it. And therefore, when we speak generally about faith, let us know that there is a kind of faith which is perceived by the understanding only, and afterwards disappears quickly, because it is not fixed in the heart. And that is the faith which James calls dead. But true faith always depends on the spirit of regeneration. Yes. The spirit of regeneration that we have the pleasure of discussing next session. Woo-hoo.